I think I done that right. I think I done it right. Good afternoon, everybody. A wee bit earlier than normal, but however, thanks for coming in, folks. Hope everybody's well. So today we're doing our second live of our haunted ships, and we have our very own Karen Perkins back with us again. Come quite a regular wee face on our panel, which we're really glad about. Today, Karen's going to be telling us all about one of my favourite stories as well, the Mary Celeste. So I'll hand it over to you, Karen, and you can tell us the story.
Well, hi everybody, and thanks for joining us, and thanks for that as well, Scott. Yes, the Mary Celeste, what a story she is. So she was found on December the 5th in 1872 by a ship called the Gracia. Empty, nobody aboard. Some of the sails weren't set properly. Some were set, some were blown out, and a lot were furled. So they boarded her to make sure, see if she was in distress, what was happening, what was going on, and they found her completely empty, not a soul aboard. Now there were some strange things about the state of the ship as well. I mentioned the sails. Some of the rigging was also damaged, but the lifeboat was gone, which that suggests that the crew abandoned. But why? And then why didn't they follow correct procedure? Because they found the logboats aboard the ship. So if you abandon ship, you take the books with you. You lash the helm so that she doesn't drift and drift wildly. But that didn't happen. And below in the cargo hold, there were 1,700 barrels of alcohol. Now, did that play a part in it? Did the crew drink it and mutiny? But then was the alcohol actually drinkable? Did it pose a different kind of threat? Just why did the crew of the Mary Celeste abandon her? She was clearly seaworthy. And where did they end up? What do you think, Scott?
It's always been a sort of favourite story of mine, because obviously it was found just adrift in open sea, miles from land anywhere. And as you just says, a light bulb was missing, but everything else was there. Everything else was in place. And it doesn't make any sense why a whole crew would just abandon a ship in open water with one boat and even know what direction they were heading in.
No. And the last entry in the log put her just north of the Azores, but then she was found 400 miles east of the Azores. 8-9 days later?
So she drifted all that way. It's just quite bizarre, really, to me. I just don't, I know there's a few different theories of actually what happened to the crew, and some I've heard they were poisoned, or it was something to do with they were delusional because of maybe some of the food was off, some of the water maybe was off and it caused them to have hallucinations. Another theory is disease. Then there's the old theory that the ship was haunted.
She had quite a reputation. This wasn't the only disaster that she was involved with. She was known as a cursed ship just from the moment that she was built, and even her first voyage, her first captain died of pneumonia. Then the second voyage, I think she hit the captain and drove her into a fishing weir, and then drove her into another ship in the English Channel, sinking that other ship. And
it's possible that some of the food or the beer, the alcohol, whatever they were carrying was off, because we talked last night about a ship. There was no refrigeration, there was no hygiene.
No, there wasn't. No, but the food would have been salted. But then the crew of the Gracia, they sailed her to Gibraltar for salvage, and they drank the water and ate the food. So that goes against that theory that the food was off. But the alcohol in the barrels, it's called unnatured alcohol. So it's industrial alcohol, and it's made undrinkable by putting in additives to make it poisonous or tasting disgusting. So but did they drink it anyway?
Maybe,
9 barrels were empty when they found them.
maybe they did drink it and they all became ill, and maybe they mistook that, for some kind of curse. Maybe,
Yes.
it was known as a cursed ship. So maybe, also back then, they wouldn't have done it, being infected with the alcohol. They might just have thought, well, everybody is, ill, and maybe we're all cursed, so we have to go off this boat, regardless of where they were.
Yeah. Or another theory with the alcohol was it disturbed somehow. We know that 9 barrels were empty. It could have been natural seepage, could have been drunk, even though that's unlikely, I think, just because of the nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or did something happen to make it spill, and the fumes, because it's explosive. Alcohol can be explosive and is an accelerant. So was there something there? Do they suspect a fire or?
I thought fire, but there wasn't any evidence of fire or anything, was there? Any?
No,
There
wasn't.
nothing. The ship was totally untouched, but undamaged. I mean, not untouched, undamaged.
No, there were no burn marks or anything to show fire, but there were a few things that were a little bit out of the usual aboard, because 2 of the hatches were open, and I think they'd been in heavy weather. They'd been in gales for most of the passage across from New York, and there was a course change as well when they were south of the Azores, and there was a course change to take them round to the north, which would have been more sheltered. So it looks like they were in heavy weather for quite some time, and you don't leave hatches open when you're in heavy weather, because that just means the sea will pour in. So 2 hatches and a skylight were open, so it suggests maybe water in the hull. And when the crew of the Dei Gratia boarded, I think they found about 3.5 feet of water, which it's significant, but it's not insurmountable.
Mm-hmm.
And they did find that the front bilge pump was working, so they did have a way of getting the water out. And the back of the aft bilge pump, that had been dismantled, but they'd done that to put the sounding rod down so they could measure the amount of water. So it's clearly a concern about how much water was below decks.
Was coming on board, but then this had it as impossible. Excuse me. That they might have picked up supplies that caused hallucinations, type of plant leaves, maybe.
I'm not sure. They would have had to leave New York with them, because there's really nowhere to stop on the way for supplies between New York and the Azores. I think that route is taken 2 reasons. One, because of the currents around there, which help to take ships on to Europe and Africa, but also to collect fresh water. So it's very, very useful stop along the way crossing the Atlantic there.
Mm-hmm. John's saying, having nearly knocked myself out by sniffing my hand after using hand sanitizer. I can imagine the gases of alcohol could have affected him quite severe. I know what you mean, John. Some of the hand sanitizers do kind of give you a woof, they're not the most pleasant smells. But I mean, so how far into his journey was it? Did you say it was just north of the Azores?
It was north of the Azores. And they were going to Genoa in Italy. So they were about just over halfway, I'd say. And the hardest part of the journey was behind them, crossing the open expanse of the Atlantic. From the Azores, it's then a shorter passage across to Gibraltar, and then the Mediterranean, which is obviously more sheltered. And then they've also got the currents helping them as well. So the hardest part was behind them, and it was And it had been a very heavy weather passage as well. It cannot have been pleasant aboard. And the captain had his wife and 2-year-old daughter aboard as well. So I can't imagine how they would have coped with those conditions.
I mean, you did one lifeboat. I don't know how many a lifeboat would hold.
Yeah.
I wouldn't imagine it'd be a whole crew, but
yeah. Well, I think it was a 20-foot lifeboat that they had, so it would have held the 10 of them. Just about. It would have been heavily laden, but it would have held the 10 of them. I think, and probably would have had some provisions as well, because they realised that the lifeboat had actually been stowed on top of the main hatch, because it would only do that if it was too big to be hung off the davits at the back at the stern. So we know it was a large lifeboat, so I think it should have held them all. But another interesting fact is that all the crew's belongings were left neatly stowed away where they should be by the berths, except for 2 crew members who they had nothing there either. So that throws another thing into the mix. Why did they take their belongings? Or did they just not have any to start with?
well, that is possible that because obviously they weren't very crew members were maybe in the sort of poor side, so maybe they didn't have very much to take or nothing at all. But it's weird that they would just abandoned everything really. And what was like.
Yes, they took some navigational equipment. So I think their sextant and a chronometer was taken, along with the navigational log and ship's register. But they left the ship's logbook behind and the log slate. The compass was destroyed. That was broken. There was another chronometer left aboard the ship, which was also wrong. So was there some misnavigation there? But they didn't stop to take anything. So just going back to the lifeboat, by looking at the remains of what was there, they didn't untie it to launch it. They took an axe to the rope to take it off quickly. So they were in a panic.
See, that's the thing. Say something has happened aboard the ship, they're all maybe hallucinating, whatever, and they want off the ship. Excuse me, Justin, we're talking about the Mary Celeste, buddy. So something's happened on the ship. They've decided, right, we need to go off of this ship. I mean, you think they would take the time to make sure if they're going to go in a lifeboat in the open ocean, you think they would take stuff to ensure that give them a better chance?
You would have thought so, yes. Yeah. It is only a supposition that they were still just to the north of the Azores. So was land in sight? Did they think it was just an easy passage to get across to land? Did the lifeboat have a sail, or was it just oars? We don't know. And just the fact that they used an axe on the lines to free the lifeboat. They didn't take the time to lash the wheel to keep that secure, which was normal procedure. They also took a halyard, one of the longest lines on the ship, with them. And now it's possible that they thought there was a threat of something happening. So they went into the lifeboat and tied themselves to the ship. And then either that line parted or the knot slipped or something, and they were cast adrift by accident.
That's possible. It's just such, as I say, the story's fascinated me for years. I think it's fascinated thousands, millions, whatever people all around the world. I think it's one of the biggest mysteries. One of the biggest sea mysteries ever. I do know there's a lot of different theories about this.
Yeah.
And then there's a paranormal side. I know paranormal was brought into it. What was the kind of history with that? You know, why the ship was cursed?
Yes. Was the ship cursed because before she was found abandoned, as I mentioned, and there was a lot of bad luck around her there. And of course, sailors are a very superstitious lot as well. You don't set sail on a Friday, for instance, no matter what the pressures are. And even after she was found, there was still a litany of bad luck and incidents followed her until she was eventually wrecked. It certainly wasn't lucky for the crew of the Day Greatest when they found her. At first, they must have thought their luck was in because, there's just an empty ship full of cargo floating about. They salvage her, take her to the salvage hearing or salvage courts in Gibraltar. They get paid from the insurers, so they get a big payout for that, don't they? Not necessarily, no, not in this case. Because that was one of the theories, was that they pirated the ship. Because that they got rid of the crew, sent them overboard, and then stole the ship. Basically, simple act of piracy to collect the salvage fees from the insurers. Something that pirates and privateers have been doing for hundreds of years by this point. So it was recognised practice, usually in war, but not always. Yes, yeah. Yes. So when they got her to Gibraltar and took her to the courts, they had the Attorney General, Solly Flood, his name was, and I've read different accounts of what kind of man he was. He was either knew his stuff and was very wise and worked out what was going on, or he was an obstinate fool who wouldn't change his mind no matter what, in face of what evidence. But he thought there was foul play going on. He thought it was piracy, and that the crew had that the Dalgratia crew had murdered the crew of the Mary Celeste for profit. And it took a long time for the crew to clear their name. And even once they were on the way to clearing their name, they were then accused of being in cahoots with Captain Briggs of the Mary Celeste, that they cocked it up together for insurance fraud. Now, in the end, they did get paid, but only about a sixth of what would normally be due to them. So they lived the rest of their lives with this cloud of doubt hanging over them. They never cleared the names of suspicion of what went on there.
It's the old saying, mud sticks.
Absolutely, yes.
You know, which refers back to Abraham Lincoln assassination.
Right.
That's there was a guy called Mudd, and he was one of the accused of being part of the group that planned the president's assassination. But he was cleared, but it haunted him all his life. It never went away, and that's where the expression "mud sticks" comes from. Because he was tarnished the rest of his days. He was still accused to his dying day of being one of the conspirators. So, I mean, let's say the crew, even though they were cleared, in one way, then somebody else pops up with the other idea that they're in cahoots with the captain, basically. But then if that's the case, did they murder the captain as well?
Yes, what happened to him? And if the captain was in on it, he took his wife and young daughter, so maybe he wanted to disappear at sea and start a new life. But if that's the case, why did he leave a 7-year-old son back in New York at school? So there's every theory. They all sound very plausible, and thank you for that comment. They all sound very plausible, but there's also an argument against it as well. And I think they in that court at Gibraltar, there were a couple of stains on the deck, on the rail, and actually on a sword that was found underneath a bunk, which were assumed to be of blood, and that was taken as fact until a few months later it's proved that it wasn't. So there weren't any signs of violence aboard. So that again, it goes against.
There would be some kind of blood somewhere. I mean, if if the crew of this ship had been only Mary Celeste and murdered the whole crew, there would be, something somewhere, blood stains or whatever.
Right. And things would be a mess. There would be signs of a fight. Things would be broken, and things would be out of order.
Because I dare say the crew of the Mary Celeste wouldn't have given up that easy.
No.
They wouldn't have stood there and said, kill me.
When you're aboard a ship like that, I mean, it's the same now, but at least any sailor now has access to emergency services, to radio, to coast guards, and they can alert people that they're in danger, send a mayday out very quickly and get help. But back then there was nothing. You're aboard that ship. That is your whole world. That is your life. Something happens to that, you are dead.
Basically, as you say, if something happens to that, you're dead because there's nowhere else to go.
No.
You're in the middle of the Atlantic, and that's it. You need to stay on this big chunk of wood, basically, no matter what. And then there is also the myth, a story, whatever you want to call it, but they were all eaten by a sea monster. I don't know if you've heard that one.
I have, yes, the giant squid. Apparently they could grow up to about 49 feet, and they have been known to attack ships. But I think just picking off sailors and just taking things off ships rather than actually. I can't see them taking a whole crew and leaving the masts intact, for example, even if it was an abnormally large giant squid. It doesn't hold water for me, that one.
No, it doesn't hold water for me. Similar fact, eating the whole crew, that's just, to me, that's just absurd. Plus, I think if it had been attacked by a giant squid, then there would be damage.
There would, yes. I think there were a couple of cuts on the bow, but that was disproved as well as just as normal damage that happens to timber. But no, if they were attacked by something, they would have fought back. There would have been damage. There would have been blood, and masts would have broken.
Just as you were throwing them out in the sea.
Yes, mutiny. Is that a possibility?
But then, if it was mutiny, where did the crew go? Mr. Cat saying the Kraken. That was mentioned as well. Mr. Cat, the Kraken got a hold of them and ate them all. But then again, you get the damage thing. There would be some kind of. But then, if it was mutiny, then where did the rest of the crew go? The ones that led the mutiny. Yes. Why? If they mutinied against, maybe the captain, whatever, they would have kept the ship.
You would have thought so, yes. If anything, if crew mutinies, they keep the ship and they put the captain in the lifeboat and send them off.
Aye, I mean, we've seen it in films. I know it's Hollywood movie, but we've seen it in films. Right, captain, you're taking the ship, you're getting in that wee boat, and you're away, cheerio. And the captain ends up, in Hollywood, the captain always ends up on a desert island or something. He always ends up there.
You said it. The point of a mutiny is we're taking the ship.
Aye.
So we would have stayed on the ship. Yes.
You don't have a mutiny on a ship, take it, and then bugger off and leave it.
No.
There's shit.
His mutiny at that time, it would have been a hanging offence as well.
So, another strange claim they were all abducted by aliens.
Yes.
That was I think it was just starting to get silly now.
Yes. Triangle as well, and they were nowhere near it. But yes, I mean it's a theory. It's impossible to disprove.
Yes. I'm not saying your comments silly, by the way, Sheldon. I mean, when that theory came up as well, I was thought, right, the theories are just getting kind of ridiculous now. Just as asking, where is the ship today?
It was wrecked not long after. Well, no, about 12 years afterwards. I think it was once it had been salvaged, it had gone back to the States and was refitted and rebuilt, but then nobody wanted it because it was cursed. So eventually, after about 12 years, it was bought, it was done out, it was put to sea again, and then it was wrecked just off Haiti. Now that was, at first it was just put down to bad luck again, but again, a salvage court looked into it and they were surprised that there wasn't anything really of any value on the wreck. And they realised it was insurance fraud, which did happen a lot as well. So they overstated the value of the goods that they were carrying, insured it for a great amount, and then sank it. So there were 3, captain and 2 others were found guilty of insurance fraud for that. So that was another piece of unlucky. But maybe the Mary Celeste wasn't happy about being deliberately wrecked. She's a cursed ship. And those 3 men came to very sad ends. I think the captain died in poverty. One of the others went mad, and the 3rd one committed suicide. So maybe Mary Celeste got her revenge.
So maybe as the justice say less of a caught by complete surprise, there would be some. No, you're right, Justice. There would be.
Yes.
They would need to be caught to maybe in their sleep, maybe. You know.
Well, all the bunks except the captain's were fully made up, so the crew weren't in bed. The captain was in bed because otherwise his bunk would have been made up. So no, they weren't asleep. And even if they had been asleep, there would have been a lookout. There would always been at least 2 lookouts.
I know it sounds. I know, Shelley, though. I know it sounds absurd that aliens came down and stole them. But as you know, you're always going to get people out there that are going to blame it on aliens. A lot of other stuff these days gets blamed on aliens. I'm not saying that I believe there is life out there on other planets. To think we're the only ones here is absurd. I said this to Kat last night as well. But we don't do UFOs and what have you. But John's loving all these theories. So it was after it was brought back, refitted. People actually did sail it again because, to me, if I knew about what the history of the ship. You sure as mud would not get me anywhere near it.
No, they found it very, very difficult to find crew. They really did. And spent most of 12 years just in dock because they couldn't find anybody to sail her until the final voyage, which turned out to be a way of recouping the losses, I think, is a safe way of putting it.
So, what do people think in the chat? What's your different theories about what actually happened aboard it? I mean, I'm more swaying towards it was something to do with some kind of hallucinations or disease or something that and the legend of the ship was cursed, and they just wanted off it.
Quite possibly, but I think there's one thing we haven't talked about, and that is natural disasters. If something happened in the natural world, so we know the weather had been really bad, so that there's a couple of 3 options. One would just be the sheer force of the wind, but the way the sails were found doesn't fit that.
Right.
It's because they had one of the top sails was flying, and if you're in a gale, you don't fly the top sails, you'd fly the lower sails where the mast is stronger, there's not as much force on the mast, and you can just control the ship better. But then was there a sea spout or water spout or even a sea quake? Could something like that have affected the Mary Celeste? So I mean, a water spout is basically a tornado at sea. And I've seen pictures of them, and they're quite freaky, to say that literally a tornado full of water. And it's bad weather, so it could well have been. It is possible. But then we mentioned earlier that the hatches were open. So if it had been a water spout, there'd be a lot more water down below. Things would be a lot wetter.
Yeah, I'd be a lot more water because all they found was you see 3.5 feet of water is all they found.
Yes. And the crew's quarters were dry.
Yeah, so just a couple of comments about it. It's just the most logical theories seem to come unstuck. I feel like they get parity, but then that doesn't explain why the ship wasn't stolen or damaged. So it can't be that.
No, the pirate theory only makes sense if it's the crew of the Day Gracia who took the ship to be salvaged. Because John's quite right. If it was pirated, then they take the cargo, they take the ship.
Big F. I took him to them and okay, Harry. That's what we appreciate all theories. All theories, buddy. Shelley's. I think they had to have voluntary walked off maybe onto another ship where they met their doom, possibly.
Yeah, I think that the sea quake theory for me has the most legs, if you like, because the area is known for a lot of sea quakes. So it was basically an earthquake but undersea. So that would be pretty violent, and what would happen to the water, what would happen to the ship, it would be lifted and tossed about. So similar to that, Misty. So a sea quake would do that, yes. So if the ship was then shoved about, and there are a couple of things that point to this may have happened. I think the very heavy water barrel on the deck had been out of position because it's normally chocked in, so it can't shift because you can't have heavy things moving about aboard a ship. That's where the phrase "the loose cannon" comes from, because if a cannon comes loose and then that's rolling about the ship in order to its movement, that can sink a ship because it can exacerbate the movement. So things are, especially heavy equipment, is very, very made very, very secure. But the big water barrel on the deck had bounced out of its chocks somehow, as had the big cast iron stove below decks. That had bounced out of position as well, and that wouldn't have been liftable. It would have had to be something massive to have had to do that. And going back to the alcohol, could the same thing have burst open those 9 barrels of alcohol? Could that have happened in the same event? And then the fumes of that industrial alcohol filled the hold. Could it even have blown the hatches off? Or did they take the hatches off to try and air the hold out?
So I think if they'd blown the hatches off, there would have been evidence there would have been damage around about the hatch, because I think we just blow it.
Not necessarily. Because I think they've done experiments where igniting alcohol fumes, and the fumes ignite, but it goes so quickly and it's colder air behind that it doesn't have time to scorch the wood. Because it takes, if you think about holding a candle flame to wood, it takes quite a bit of time before there's actually scorch marks there. So if they'd thought, oh gosh, the whole thing is going to blow, that could have caused panic. That could have caused them to cut the lifeboat free, to forget the logbooks, to forget to lash the tiller, to lash the wheel. And then in a rush, and they didn't tie the lifeboat's tether on properly. Although for a sailor to mess up a knot, that's not good. But then if it's bad weather, could the line have parted, or could they have just tried to go for shore? I don't know. It's not certain. There's still questions, but it's the most, for me, it's the most likely. Does anybody else agree? What do you think? Yes, Harry.
Similar to a backdraft, if the alcohol fired up. Possibly there was a mass panic, to get off the ship, but then everything seemed undisturbed on the ship. So if you've got any people running around, trying off a ship, there would have been some kind of evidence, bumping into things or, whatever.
Yeah,
even
because if the stove was moved, that heavy barrel was moved, but all the crew's belongings were still neatly stowed away. All the bunks they're still neatly made up. So,
you know, for
and
some
no
ask,
barrels come free. So, yes, it's not certain by any means.
you know, 'cause I mean, that's one theory, but then as I say, all these people running about, trying off a ship, there's going to be confusion. You're going to, you know, whether you go to your bunk to try and grab a jacket or whatever, you know, there's going to be, I think, just my opinion, I think it'll be something.
Yeah.
More dangerous than alcohol or ignitable fuel. There would need to be fumes compared to oxygen.
Right, so that the hold would have been sealed. It would have been the hatches would have been sealed down, especially in bad weather. So and there were 9 barrels of alcohol, so about 500 gallons that were empty. Now there is no proof to say that they all emptied at once. If they did, then it could have filled that space with fumes. But they could have they were made out of a different kind of wood, and they could have, which was more porous, so it could have just seeped out over time. So there's certainly no proof.
It could have been seepage. Do we know how many crew members there was likely to be in the ship?
Yes.
Seems that not one person stayed.
Yeah, there were 7 crew members: the captain, his wife, and his 2-year-old daughter. And I think it's odd that not one person stayed, especially if they tethered the lifeboat to the ship and they hadn't lashed the wheel. Because knowing what I know, I mean, I was just a dinghy sailor, but I would not want to be in a longboat tied to a ship that we thought was going to go down or blow up, and where the rudder was just free to do whatever it wanted, no sea anchor, no nothing. That would itself have been extremely dangerous, and the ship itself could have come on top of them. So it is strange that not one person stayed. And what happened to the captain staying with his ship?
That's what Shelley, that's the next comment. That's what Shelley's seen, especially the captain. I was going to put it up next. But with the fumes in the hold, they've changed the buoyancy of the ship and have tipped it.
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure, because fumes, they would have gone up and they would have spread, so they wouldn't have gone to one side as opposed to the other. So I doubt it, but I don't know what the weight of alcohol fume is compared to air, so I don't know. I'd be surprised.
And do you know where the wood came from to make the boat? Maybe the wood was haunted and the crew were experienced paranoia. That is a good point. You know, I mean, a lot of people might laugh it off, but you know, there's so many cases about spirits attaching to dolls and various different other objects. You know,
built in Canada, in what's now Nova Scotia. So I'm starting to think about that book and film, The Terror, now. So you never know. You never know. There was something wrong with that ship, definitely. There was something wrong with that ship.
For so much bad luck to default, to default, I don't know what default means, but default, I mean, it's, you know, to me, it's just my opinion again, there has to be something, you know, I mean, we can all have a run of bad luck, you know, but at the end of the day, how can one particular ship have so much bad luck?
Yes.
You know, panic and fear can cause irrational thoughts, and it.
Yeah.
Totally, you know, I mean, I dare say there's one point in all our lives where something's happened to you, panicked about it, or you've been scared about something, and your mind does tend to just, you know, go into overdrive. And
the captain had his wife and 2-year-old daughter aboard as well. So did he panic because of that? Whereas he was a very experienced and well-respected captain. But did the fact that his wife and 2-year-old daughter were aboard, did that impair his judgment and lead him to panic? Quite possibly.
I think in those circumstances, you know, I'm speaking as a father, just me. If your wife and your daughter's aboard, then and if something does happen, then you stop becoming a captain, you become a husband and a father.
Yeah.
You know, your mind automatically, some people might disagree with me, this is just the way I see it. You know, you're not acting as a captain, you're acting as a husband and a father.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you know, to hell with the ship. I need to get my wife and you know, my wife and daughter to safety, and screw
Maybe
the
that's
ship.
why so maybe that's why he didn't stay aboard the ship.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have stayed aboard. It could have helped. Something could have happened.
You know, if his wife and daughter were in the lifeboat and I'm not staying in this ship because I want to make sure, you know, they're safe and they get find land somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah. It would have changed the way on one side of the ship as the fumes would have been more dense than air.
Well, actually, I mean, thinking it's possible. I honestly don't know. I suppose it depends how the barrels were stored. So if they were the ones that broke, that were empty, were all stored on one side, it's quite possible. And there was water in as well. So if it was shifted, then the weight of the water going over. So that could have affected it as well. Because we know they were concerned about the level of water in the hold, so it's possible. Crew and passengers on the ship, there were 10 people, 7 crew, the captain, his wife, and his daughter.
Mrs. said, too right, Scott, your child is the most important. As, I mean, that's partly why the captain wouldn't have stayed, because to say you stop being the captain, you know, father and husband mode kicks in automatically.
But would a 19th century sea captain think the same way? The society was different, values were different.
Well, I know you're right, Kelly. I suppose you need to take that into you take that into consideration. I'm just speaking, you know, you know what I mean. I know.
Sorry, Karen. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just going to say, I know in this day and age, your father instinct kicks in right away, you know. But back then, you say a 19th century sea captain possibly think different. I can't say. Harry, if you could look into the science, that would be excellent, because I'm not good with science. You know, I gave up science in school with the Bunsen burners and the test tubes. I just gave up, you know. But that'd be good if you could do that. That'd be excellent. So in a panic with so few people, you'd be able to see all people in the boat as opposed to a mass of people. So in a panic with so few people, you'd be able to see all the people on the boat as opposed to. That's true, but my thinking is, you know, you can see, you know, 10 people there, they're all running about, you can see them all, but at the same time, you don't know what's going through their minds, and your mind's also concentrating on your wife, your daughter.
Yes.
How can we get out of this?
Yes.
You know, where are we going to go?
Yeah. And another thing that's just hit me, it was also believed to be very unlucky to have a woman aboard, and they had 2 women aboard what was already believed to be a cursed ship.
That's right. I remember seeing that.
And they'd had bad weather all the way from New York, so goodness knows what that passage was like and how dire that passage was. Did they believe that having the wife and daughter there was just compounding the bad luck?
Well, I don't.
Did the captain and the wife and child, did they go overboard for the crew to save themselves? And then they got things wrong when there was a problem at the Azores. That's a possibility as well, that the captain wasn't there to make those decisions when things got really bad.
So the sales, the juicy can they were heading for Italy?
Yes, they were going for Genoa in Italy.
The reason for the journey?
It's the cargo. They delivering their 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. So
what moved on the boat? That was iron.
That was the stove, the galley stove.
And at what level? That would have been below deck, would it not?
It would have been below decks. It wouldn't have been right at the bottom. So it would have been in about the middle of the ship. Because they would have needed access, just in case there was a problem, they would have needed access to it, to be able to put any fires out if there were any. So it would have been about amidships. It would have been as much in the middle of the boat as possible, just for the weight itself of it, because that may well have been the heaviest thing aboard the ship.
And there was never ever any record of anybody, being washed up on shore or nothing.
Yes,
Crew.
there was. Yes, there was. Now it's not proven, but about 5 months later, there was a structure that looked like a couple of rafts, just all tied together, lashed together, washed up on the Portuguese coast, which does fit in. That's where the currents would have taken anything just floating. It's the same direction in which the Mary Celeste herself was taken along in the currents. And there was, on one raft, there was one body wrapped in an American flag, and the American flag from the Mary Celeste was missing. And on the other raft, there were 4 bodies. So there's possibly had the lifeboat wrecked as well, and they cobbled together some kind of raft, or was it from another shipwreck altogether? We just don't know. There was never an investigation to prove that they were from the Mary Celeste, but it's certainly possible. The timing and the place stack up, but that's only 5 of them.
And the thing about the American flag, that's missing to the ship.
Yeah. Yes.
But one body turns up with an American flag.
So going back to what we were saying before, they felt plagued by bad luck, wanted rid of the women, had to get rid of the captain as well, because he was protecting them. That would leave 7 people. 5 then washed up. If 2 were lost when the lifeboat wrecked, just connecting the dots. It's possible. It's possible, but again, we'll never know.
We will never know. It's one of these, there were ships that were really, my reading's away to potted there, I'm telling you. There were ships that were really badly designed and could barely sail. I can't remember the name, but a big warship sank almost immediately after leaving port somewhere due to an imbalance.
There are all sorts of really bad reports of seamanship and design things. I think if you heard of Henry Morgan, the famous pirate or privateer, he's first time out, I think he wrecked 2 ships. He was no seaman. I think the first time out he was given a great big warship called the Oxford, and no discipline aboard whatsoever. Somebody goes into the gunpowder magazine with a candle, blows it up to smithereens on its first voyage. The only people that survived were the captain and the people in the captain's cabin, because it was right at the back. So there's loads. I think the Spanish Armada, there were a lot of ships sank there because they had the wrong cannon and all sorts of things. So, I guess, Harriet, yes.
If they stopped me, they would have done one.
Yeah. So there was a sea quake. It lifted the ship. It shook them about, moved the stove, moved the barrel. Yeah.
That's it, exactly, because, obviously back then, these guys, maybe, no disrespect to them at all, but maybe they weren't the most intelligent of people, I'm not saying they were stupid, but, the stove moves, I think, this is a cursed ship, that stove moved, this is haunted, we're off. I just think it would need to be something really scary or, really big to make them just abandon a ship in the middle of nowhere.
Yes, because that was their life. That was their lives depended on that ship. So they would have had to be terrified to have left that big ship to get into a little 20-foot lifeboat in the same seas, in the same conditions that were threatening the big ship.
It'd be different if there was a big hole in the side of the ship or something, and it was, it was actually sinking. But as we know, there wasn't, because if that had been the case, it would never be just a sank.
Yeah. The ship was perfectly seaworthy.
And
the crew of the Dei Gracia, they sailed it to Gibraltar, no problem. So the ship was seaworthy. There was.
So now I've got two theories. You know, I say the sort of hallucinations one, but then as you pointed out, possible piracy by the crew of the other ship.
Mm.
You know, but it would be good to know.
Yes.
Kind of abandoned it at night. It would be virtually pitch black, but for candle, star, and moonlight, we play havoc with us. Well, that's true. You know, nobody actually knows when.
Well, because they found the log slate, and the log slate is kept up to date hourly, and that's where they just make the notations, which are then put into the log proper at the end of the day. And I think the last notation was at 8 a.m. So they think it would have been between 8 and 9 a.m. Something would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it would
do you know the last entry? Do we know what the last entry was?
It was just north of the Azores.
And what it said in it? Is that all it said? Just is that what the last entry said? Just where the position?
Yes, that's where they were. And the way the sails were set, they only had sails on the foremast, and they had the jib, which is a triangular sail at the bottom, right at the front, and then they had the very top square sail set. And that doesn't make any sense to actually sail, especially in strong winds. But it is a configuration where you can have the top sail working against the jib, so you can kind of keep the ship steady, and it kind of puts the handbrake on, if you like. So the wind is blowing against one sail one way and against the other sail the other way. So the two opposing forces keep the ship stopped. So that suggests they were sheltering behind the islands because the wind was coming from the southwest, I think. So it suggests they were sheltering behind the island there.
Paranormal and history sounds weird saying it. Paranormal and history's got a question. I'm assuming it's one of the girls. We've got a question for us, you know. So, how long did the ship sitting before it stopped being used? Was there any reported hauntings on it at any time afterwards?
Right. Yes, it was. No, it was taken back to America because it was owned by a New York firm, and then it just languished in ports because they couldn't find anyone to crew it. So it just rotted away, really. And then a company bought it for extremely cheaply, rebuilt it, refitted it, and that was 12 years after she was found abandoned. And then she was then they sunk her off Haiti. And then the three men who did that, they were then hounded to their death or life, or the Mary Celeste.
Did they keep the same name? Did they keep the same name on the ship, or I don't know if you can change the name of the ship, but
before it was the Mary Celeste, it was called the Amazon. But there was so much bad luck. As I mentioned before, on the maiden voyage, the captain came ill with pneumonia and died. Then the second captain, he ran into a fishing weir. He collided with another ship in the English Channel and sank that other ship. He then also grounded her at Nova Scotia, and then she was sold as a wreck. And then her name was changed to the Mary Celeste. And that's another thing that you don't do with ships. Bad luck to change a ship's name. So there are all sorts of things. So maybe that compounded the curse instead of, maybe they were trying to get rid of the curse, but it compounded it instead.
So it remained named the Mary Celeste until the day it sank?
Yes, I think so. I'd like to double check. I can't remember seeing a different name after the Mary Celeste. Have you seen something?
No, I've not seen. I just gave myself that thought as well. I'll need to check that as well. I was just thinking, you know, obviously after it sat for X amount of time, then being refitted, and people would know the history. Would people maybe think, well, why don't we give it a new name? And See that? It proves its luck. Do you know what I mean? Maybe the Lord knows he didn't have much luck up until it was found anyway, even after it. But I really don't think you would have got me on that boat at all, anytime.
No, I wouldn't have crossed the Atlantic on it. No, thank you.
No, I wouldn't cross the Clyde on it. I don't mind the life would have given me go up the Clyde on it. No, I mean, no chance. But we don't know. There's hundreds of theories, from hallucinations, disease to sea monsters and UFOs, hauntings. It's just I don't think it'll ever be solved. And I think that makes it so captivating as well, because one of these mysteries that people want to know the answer to. They want the mystery solved, so they're always going to keep digging and digging in the hope that they find something that nobody else is. It's human nature, really.
It is, yeah. We want to know. We want to know. We want to understand. Thank you, John, for that last comment.
Thank you, John. And maybe they want to be the one to solve the mystery of the Maya Celeste. I mean, it seems maybe, off topic, but a Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
Is there or isn't there? I've got my own theories on it, which I'm not saying. But, there's always going to be people hunting Nessie.
Yes.
Until Nessie walks up on the beach at Fort William and says hello, then there's always going to be people looking for her or him.
Yeah.
I think assume Nessie's a she for some reason. Don't know why, but, the Mary Celeste, people are always going to be digging and digging.
Yes.
Maybe someday somebody will come up with the real answer of what happened. But then, again, saying that, it's proving it.
Yes. Yeah, and there's no way to do it.
There's no way to do it. She was just, etc. But we'll wind it up there, Karen. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I hope everybody else in the chat enjoyed it as well. So thank you very much for that, my dear. I'll just hang on to you as usual, just after we come off. So thanks for coming in, everybody. We're back to Karen's back as well tomorrow morning at 11:15.
Yep. Yes.
However, you're on the panel quite a bit this week. You're earning your money.
I know. I need to get some writing done.
I know. But we're hogging you. We're keeping a hold of you all week this week. Back with the next instalment of who were they? Who they were?
Yes, we're talking about Roger Knoll, who was the magistrate and witch hunter in Pendle for those Pendle witch trials in 1612. So that could be interesting. Yeah,
and then tomorrow night we've got Jennifer from our USA team. She's coming out to talk about another haunted ship. I don't know what one it is, and if I did know, I wouldn't tell you anyway, because we want to keep it a surprise. So thanks for coming in, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, wherever you are, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 11:15. Yes. So take care for now. Bye.